So the rental reform bill is finally with us. In this video I'm going to lay out what exactly has been announced, what threats there are for property investors and landlords, and what opportunities are also created from this bill. That's all coming up. So if you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell icon. We put out new videos each and every week, all dedicated to keeping you on top of your property investing game. The rental reform bill has been much debated by the tenant lobby and also the landlord lobby, and it's a little bit of a fudge really, but here is what has been announced, as well as my analysis as to where landlords are going to lose out and where landlords might gain a bit. Under current law, when you have a tenancy agreement, you set a period for it. So sometimes it's 6 months, typically they're 12 months, sometimes they're 24 months, but most tenancy agreements that we have are 12 months. Now, the tenancy agreements that are in place will remain in place until they expire, but from October 2024, all new tenancy agreements will be rolling tenancy agreements. And that means they have no term. They are rolling tenancy agreements. So the tenant will be able to move in, they can stay there for 4 months before serving 2 months notice to leave. So a tenancy will be for a minimum term of 6 months with no annual contract renewals and that kind of thing. Now, in some ways, this simplifies the administration process. Once you've got a tenancy agreement, you are done and dusted. Letting agents will be very upset by this because they charge the landlord a fee every year when they renew a tenancy. It'll be interesting to see whether they absorb these charges or whether they just pass these on to landlords in higher charges to us, basically. Now, here's the thing that will affect you as a landlord. Now, there are a huge amount of administrative costs in starting a new tenancy. You know, you've got a tenancy deposit scheme, you've got to make sure all the certification is in place, you've got to kind of make sure the property is cleaned and ready for the new tenant to move in. And you've also got to have an agent on board to let the property. Most letting agents charge a let fee on the basis of a 12-month let. So if the tenant moves out after just 6 months, that is a very, very high turnover for the administration cost that you have to sort of go through just for a 6-month tenancy. So that will be expensive on us landlords if you have high tenant turnover with people moving out every 6 months as opposed to having a minimum term of 12 months. I'm not happy about that change. I do prefer a minimum contract term of 12 months to make the administration costs worthwhile. Otherwise, it's a bit more like a short let. I think what we may start to see is savvy landlords taking a leaf out of mobile phone operators' playbook and having differential pricing and discounting based on how long people stay in a property. So for example, you may have a tenancy contract where you say the rent is this much, it's £100 or whatever, and if you stay for 6 months or more, then you get a 10% discount for every month that you're in after that. So what that does is allows you to load up extra rent in the first 6 months to deal with the extra admin costs if you're going to have high tenant turnover in the early months, and it will deter people from using it as a cheap way of getting short-term accommodation. But I'm a student landlord, I hear you say. I've got student lets, and I can't have people moving in September and then deciding to piss off in Easter or whatever before the academic year is finished, because I've got no hope in hell of reletting that property. Well, the government have been very nice to student landlords because they've basically said that student landlords or landlords renting to students are exempt from this rolling tenancy arrangement. But for everyone else, remember that the rolling tenancies come into play in October of 2024, so all tenancies after that will be the new rolling tenancy regime, and the existing tenancies, if they're fixed term, those will apply until they expire and then go on to the rolling tenancy if they expire after October this year. So pets, this has been a bone of contention since Jeremy Corbyn proposed that tenants should be allowed to have whatever pets they like in a property. This has been bounced around between landlord lobby and tenant lobby in the Renters Reform Bill, and what they've come up with is a little bit of a fudge, but here is what has been announced. Landlords will no longer be able to refuse a tenant's request to have a pet or pets without providing a reasonable reason. But the tenants must make a written request to have a pet or pets, and the landlord has the right to assess the suitability of their property for the pet. So this then gives the cop-out to landlords who have HMO property, for example. If you're renting a room in a shared house, it will be easy to come up with a reasonable reason. If you're in a one-bedroom flat on the 3rd floor, then it should be easy, with no outside space, it should be easy to come up with a reason why keeping a greyhound dog is not suitable in those premises. The other interesting cop-out is with flats. So if you are in a leasehold flat, if you're renting out a leasehold flat, then the freeholder may have imposed terms in the lease on that flat which say you can't have pets, you can't have dogs, you can't have cats and all this sort of stuff. If the superior lease, in other words the freeholder's lease, says that you can't have pets, then that tenant of course is obliged to follow that superior lease and doesn't have to offer it to the tenant. So there's a cop-out there. If you rent out a flat and it's in a block that you own, then make sure you adapt the freeholder rules accordingly. But I think where it will be difficult to come up with a reasonable reason to refuse a pet is when you're letting to a single family, you're letting a family house out and it's got a garden, say, and someone wants to keep a dog. It's going to be hard to come up with a reasonable reason. Now, there's been a change to the Section 8 notice regime, which I very, very welcome. Now, Section 8 notices are when basically a landlord gets a possession of a property because the tenant has breached certain contract terms. The typical one that happens quite a lot is that tenants don't pay rent. Now, here's the thing, this has been very frustrating for landlords. Unscrupulous tenants who know how to play the system, this is what they do. They don't pay their rent, the landlord serves them a Section 8 notice, and just before the court hearing date, the tenant goes along and pays up the arrears and brings the rent back up to date. And then, of course, you can't take them to court and get them out, and then they stop paying again. Now, to protect landlords from tenants who abuse this system, they've brought in a 3 strikes and you're out kind of regime. So if you fall into arrears, if your tenant falls into arrears 3 times, then that means that a Section 8 eviction ground is automatic. Rent increases. So you might be thinking, well, if you've got rolling tenancies, how do you increase the rent? What we used to do was basically reissue or renew tenancies each year, and at that time you would revise the rent. So if you have rolling tenancies, you can still increase the rent, but you can only do so every 12 months. There has to be a 12-month interval between each rental increase. What I would recommend is that you put in your tenancy contract to say that rent increases happen every year and they are inflationary. So you set the expectation in the tenancy contract at the very beginning of what's going to happen, and that clause is fairly common across the industry these days. Property Ombudsman Scheme. This is another new measure that's been put in this rental reform bill. So there are loads of government-inspired ombudsman schemes across a range of different industries. This is the first one that landlords will have to register with, and basically an ombudsman is an independent body that is there to receive and resolve complaints if they can't be resolved directly between landlord and tenant. But we're going to have to wait and see how exactly that plays out. So the government wants to set up a property portal, and this is to provide transparency regarding property standards of what is being let out and compliance with legislation. Now, of course, at the moment, you've got to have EPCs, energy performance certificates, gas safety certificates, if there's gas appliances in the property, electrical certificates, all that sort of stuff. And what they want to do is create a property portal as a central repository for this information. So I guess this will negate the need to provide these documents at the beginning of every tenancy. Instead, this will be available via a government organised portal. Details of this to be announced, but rest assured there's going to be a cost there. Same with the Ombudsman scheme, by the way. I'm sure you're going to have to pay some kind of registration fee, which is likely to be 40, 50 quid at least for registering with the Ombudsman. With this property portal, remember it's per property. So just to lodge your EPC and safety certificates and all of that for each property that you have, I bet there'll be some kind of registration fee per property that you need to register on there. So it's a good little earner for some government IT contractor who's got their snouts in the trough for this little contract, but an extra £30 minimum in fee to register each one of your properties. When at the moment, what do? Well, you got all the certification, you send it out with the tenancy contract at the beginning of the tenancy, and you get some kind of signature to show that they've received it and they've been served it. That's a lot better than paying 30 quid minimum to have it put on some portal. But anyway, that's what they've announced, that's what they're doing. What do you think? Do you think it's going to help, or do you think it's just a money-making scam? Give me a comments below, and also if you're liking this video, smash that like button. Don't forget to subscribe as well. Now, they're introducing decent property standards, which we'll have to see what this entails. There could be fines imposed if you don't have a decent property of up to 30k. There's also a rent repayment order of up to 24 months rent, which tenants will be able to claim for certain offences. What worries me about this is, of course, we could end up with ambulance chasers, like with certain lawyers that are out there just looking to make a fast buck on the bandwagon. But what landlords will have to do is make sure that their administrative ship is tight indeed and all I's and T's are dotted and crossed. No DSS, no housing benefit tenants. This is a phrase you will not be able to use anymore when marketing your properties to let. It's been very, very common for many private landlords not to be excited about tenants on housing benefit, because that can bring all sorts of problems for certain types of properties. And that's why many landlords and many lettings agents have deterred housing benefit claimants from applying for a property by excluding them in the ad. You won't be able to use that wording anymore. Okay, section 21, no fault evictions. This is the biggie which has been talked about a lot. Now, the tenant side says, no fault evictions need to be scrapped. But the landlord side is basically saying, look, it's our property at the end of the day, and there are certain circumstances in which we need it back, and we don't want to have to go through a long convoluted court process in order to exercise that right. So what the government have said is, okay, we accept that the court system is a little bit overloaded right now. We won't bring this into effect until the court system is ready to take it. When it is enacted, they'll give 6 months notice before you have to comply with things like the Ombudsman scheme and this property portal idea and all of that sort of stuff. Now, what they've done is a little bit of a fudge because, Michael Gove went on telly and he said, oh, this is going to be brought into law before the election.
Can you guarantee the 11 million renters in this country that you will end this before the general election?
Yes, we have a bill. It's gone through its stages in the House of Commons, and that bill does a number of things to help people in the private rented sector.
Knowing full well that the court system isn't going to be ready.
Because previously you've said, well, the courts might not be able to cope, so we might bring in the new law, but it actually might still happen because the courts aren't ready. So I ask you again, just to be really explicit, will this practice have ended by the time of the next general election?
We will have outlawed it, and we will have put the money into the courts in order to ensure that they can enforce that.
Okay.
So what he's done is a classic Michael Gove fudge. Yes, he's bringing this to Parliament before the election, and yes, this bill is going to go through. But what he's done is he's left it in the bill for the Lord Chancellor to decide on when the court system is ready for the abolition of Section 21 no-fault evictions, and when that Lord Chancellor decides that the court system is ready, then 6 months from that date, no-fault evictions will be abolished. That's what's on the table right now. Of course, a change of government could change all this, who knows? They could just say, look, stuff the Lord Chancellor, we are going to abolish Section 21 straight away. They could say, stuff the landlord's right to give a reasonable reason to refuse a pet. We're going to allow tenants to set up a whole zoo in a two-bedroom end of terrace. We don't know what's likely to come from an incoming government. It could be all change, but this is what's going through right now, and this is what you guys have to prepare for as landlords. That's it for this video. See you guys next time. The Baker Street Property Meet is the UK's largest and #1 property investors networking event. The property market is going through monumental change right now, and at Baker Street Property Meet we aim to keep you up to date with the latest tips and tricks and insider tactics to help you keep on top of your property investing game and succeed in these troubled economic times. The Baker Street Property Meet is fundamentally about networking, because it's not what you know, it's who you know. And at Baker Street, we aim to connect you with the people to make your property journey a monumental success. There's no better place to be to further your property investment journey than the Baker Street Property Meet. So make sure you're here, you're connecting with myself and Andrew Roberts, our expert guest speakers, and 300 passionate property people each and every month. See you at the next meet. Get your spot at bakerstreetpropertymeet.com.